My name is Greg Ingalls. I am interviewing Greg Ingalls on June 1st, 2017 for Project Next Generation's Veterans History Project at the LaSalle Public Library at LaSalle, Illinois. When and where were you born?
I was born in Mendota, Illinois. When? July 23rd, 1966.
Do you have any siblings who were in the military?
Yes, I do. My dad was in the Army. He was in Japan just after World War II. And my uncle was in the United States Army Air Corps. He worked on P-38 Lightning airplanes in San Antonio, Texas during the war. And a cousin who was in the Air Force during the 70s, and then he went into the Army during the 80s.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Why did you choose to be in that branch of military?
I chose Air Force because I liked airplanes. I also chose to go into the service because I figured that was a way to pay for school and to have a job after I got through with school.
How did your family feel about it when you told them you enlisted?
The very first person I told that day was I told my dad and my mom. And my dad was, I think he was kind of stunned because I never really told him I was going to do it. And I know he made one comment that he could have helped pay for school. When I told him my reasons why I went in, he said, I could have helped you pay for school. So he was a little stunned at first, but I think after the initial reaction wore off, I think everybody was okay with it.
For how many years did you serve?
I served on active duty for 2 years and 9 months. Active duty. And then the rest was inactive reserve.
Where did you serve?
Initially, I did 6 weeks of basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. After that, I had 2 months of basic electronic training in Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. Followed that by a couple months in Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico, and that was for initial avionics training on the F-111 fighter bomber. And then from there, I was shipped overseas for 2 years serving in RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, England, which is by Cambridge.
Did you have any friends that you became close to?
Most of my friends were people who I worked with. Most of them are my age, and I guess we had common experiences. When you're overseas, obviously those are probably the most relatable people that you know, and you see them day to day. So you get a relationship with them working day to day. So we would travel together and hang out together.
What was your main occupation?
My main occupation was avionics specialist, which was, as you can see right here, I was an avionics specialist on the F-111F aircraft, which entailed repairing the electronics in the airplane. There was radar up front, and inside the aircraft there were displays and other instruments that tied into that. So on any given day, if the plane worked okay, then you wouldn't have to do anything. But other days you'd have to go out and troubleshoot. You had to run up the electronics and use the manuals to run through and troubleshoot it and figure out what the problem was.
Did you enjoy your job or was it hard?
For enjoying the job, I think it took, when I got to England, that was my primary job. And it took about a year for me to be comfortable in that job. But after I got more comfortable and got more skill sets, and I was a lot more confident. And I was able to work on my own after about a year being on the job. And the hardest part of my job, right, the hardest part was probably sometimes working on the aircraft. One was called a red ball, where you'd have to go out and the aircraft would be running. So they'd shut down one engine and you work on the other side. The hardest part was you would have to talk to the crew and from memory try to understand what they were seeing in the aircraft so you could troubleshoot it. You couldn't have any manuals because if you had the manuals in your hand, they may get sucked into the engine. You know, the flight line could be rainy or windy or something like that, so you did not want to lose anything that would damage the engine. So from memory, you had to understand what they were seeing, and then you could go back to the trucks. All the manuals were in the truck, in the service truck, so you could go back to the truck, and then you could help figure it out and kind of sharpen the question a little bit, and then you could go back out and kind of work through the problem a little bit more. If you identified what it was and they could keep running, then you would have to go out and open the manuals, and then you'd have to use tools to open the manual again on the opposite side of the running engine, so you don't want to drop any screws or fasteners while you're opening that panel. You take the replacement part, put it back in, and then you'd run through the run-up again and make sure everything was running good.
Did you have any special training?
My special training began after basic training, which was basic electronics training. After that, in Canada, Mexico was the more advanced avionics training. That was your initial training into the systems for that particular aircraft.
What did you do when you weren't working?
When I wasn't working, I was pretty much relaxing. I'd be relaxing on base. You go to various things on base. Or what I really like to do is travel. So being in England, you know, there was a lot of things close by that you could go see. So I know I spent numerous times going down to London and seeing the various sites. Once went up to Scotland, and the various other times going on the continent. In particular, when my family came over to visit, we would spend a couple weeks sightseeing through Europe.
How did you communicate with your family?
My primary communication was telephone. Pretty much, I would have to go to one of the base rec centers to call home at that time. So it was a pay-as-you-go. We didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So we go over there. I lived on the barracks on base, so we didn't have a personal phone in our room. So we go over to the rec center and make calls home, overseas calls, obviously. And then the other way would be through the mail. I would write, and they would write back and forth postcards, and sometimes they would send packages, food packages, or something. My sister they would pack silly things in there just to make my day a little bit brighter. I remember one time there was I think it was a 10-foot scarf, and it was about an inch wide. Completely useless, but they thought it was funny.
How did you feel about being away from your home and family?
I think at times sometimes it was hard. I did miss them. I mean, because that long of a separation. I mean, prior to that, I really hadn't been away from home for any significant period. So that was my initial period, long-term time away from home. And not seeing them face-to-face, you're used to the daily family activities and that sort of thing. So once you don't have that anymore, then you realize what you did have. The other thing is being overseas in a different country is completely different culture. So it's a little bit of a culture shock when you first get there and seeing things differently and not having the same that I guess you're used to.
Did you ever get tired of doing the same routine every day?
I don't think we got tired of doing the same routine every day. It seemed like our days were a little bit different. Because on any given day you might have a different problem that you'd have to work to. So you may spend a day not having to work, you could just ride the truck all day, and there's other days where you put in a long day working on a problem and you have to wait for the night shift to come in and turn it over. So, you know, the routine wasn't the same every day. And then there was other times where we'd have different job responsibilities. One of my job responsibilities was debrief. So after the crew came back, you got all the information on the aircraft and kind of wrote down and documented what they had done that day from a maintenance perspective as far as their flight. And then that would be on a record for the activities for that aircraft. Other times, in 1989, I had spent a TUI, temporary duty in Spain. So that was something completely different, is pick up everything you have and then go to another country and work out of that country for 2 weeks. Those were long days, 12-hour days, but then you got a couple days off, so you could go out and see something else. See the local countryside, go out for a meal, and go see some of the sites that were there. Thinking back on it now, you know, a routine day, yeah, that was, for the most part, our job was kind of routine, but it was broken up by other things. You know, either sometimes watching other activities going on. I remember that we were co-located with the SR-71 and the TR-1 reconnaissance from the next base over. And I remember one day watching them do an engine run. They replaced the engine. And we were just sitting in the truck. It wasn't our airplane, so we could just sit and watch. And they were running up the engine. And right in front of us, they had a full afterburner, and the truck was shaking. And we were all kind of giggling just watching this whole thing unfold in front of us as they did this engine run. And it was super loud, but we thoroughly enjoyed the show before us.
How many hours of sleep did you get?
Typically, I probably got normal hours of sleep, 6 to 8. There would be times when you had to work longer hours, or maybe you had a week of a drill you'd have to go through where the hours would be 12 hours. You'd have 12-hour shifts. And then sometimes those would be on night shifts, so during the day you'd want to do something else or take care of some other business, so it might be a little bit short. But for the most part, it was standard sleep, 6 to 8 hours.
Where were you when your duty ended?
I was, at that time, stationed in RAF Lakenheath in England. Initially, I was supposed to be transferred to Cannon Air Force Base in Mexico because that was the only place that they had the F-111 aircraft. So there was only a handful of bases I could have gotten transferred to. But at that time, there was a let me think about this one. I was initially ordered back to Cannon, but I got an early separation as part of a strength reduction program within the Air Force. So rather than being sent back to Cannon, I was separated early, and from there, at the end of January 1990, I went to McGuire for out processing for a day, and then after that I took a flight to Chicago and I was home.
How did you feel when your military life ended?
When my service was over, I probably spent a couple months on the couch just trying to readapt to civilian life. I didn't realize probably at the time that you're living in not a high stress environment, but the tempo is a little bit different, and just a relaxed pace, I think, winding down from that, it took me a while I felt myself just not wanting to do anything for a while. But eventually, after a couple months, I got a part-time job, and then I resumed school at a local community college. So once I got back into school, I had some schooling before I entered the Air Force, so I had an extra rank. I had actually went in as a two-stripe Airman First Class. And so when I got out of the military, once I got back in school, I kind of got refocused on what I wanted to do.
How did you return home?
How did I return home? You think of transportation-wise? Transportation-wise was when I left, and I'll tie this back, when I went to England, I was on a military aircraft and I arrived directly at RAF Middleton Hall. When I came home, I flew a commercial aircraft into McGuire. Actually, I think it was into Philadelphia, and then it took ground transportation over to McGuire Air Force Base. From McGuire, then I flew commercial aircraft to Chicago, Illinois, where my family met me. I think they drove through a snowstorm to meet me at the airport. I think they said it was one of the last flights in Chicago, but they met me there, and I was very happy to see them.
Were they happy to see you?
They were very happy to see me. If I recall, they had signs and everything else there to make sure that that I wouldn't miss them. So yes, it was very apparent they were happy to see me.
How did you feel when you returned home?
How did I feel when I returned home? Again, I think it took a little while to realize that my service was over. Kind of separating myself from that day-to-day activity to basically an unscheduled activity where my plans are what I made them. So from that, just a readjustment to a different way of life, and planning what your next day is, and not having to follow orders, I guess, as far as where your next station would be.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
Readjust. That's kind of what we had before. I think just initially that downtime, just to refocus and refigure out where I was and what my path going forward was. Again, once I got into school, when I was in the Air Force, I took a couple community classes, college classes, and I think I always anticipated going back to school. And so when I was out of the military, I knew that I had the GI Bill and the funding to go back to school and to have them pay for it, which is what I actually did. I got the GI Bill, and then Illinois actually had another program where they paid your tuition. So I finished community college on my own, and I transferred to the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana to finish a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And then from there I went on. I still had some funds left over, so I pursued a master's of science in mechanical engineering.
What have you done since separating from the military?
Since separating from the military, again, I went back to school, completed my associate's degree at the local community college. From there, I went to the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, completed a bachelor's of mechanical engineering, and after that, I obtained a master's of science in mechanical engineering. After received the Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering. I went to work for a firm in Chicago that coincidentally also made a mix of military and commercial airplane avionics. So really it came from full circle, where before in the military I was doing servicing and maintenance on avionics systems, to where now I was applying my education to designing avionics components, basically electronics for various military contractors. So kind of that experience, I believe, gave me confidence to understand what it took when this piece of equipment reached the field. And having to live up to that, because I knew what was on the other end. You had to make something that was reliable and would serve and make a person that was me make their job easier. And I remember when I was in the Air Force, we replaced one of the radar systems. It was made by a contractor. I was in charge of replacing it on all the airplanes within our squadron. And what I remember is that system was very good. It really minimized the amount of maintenance, was easy to troubleshoot. And I think that experience really lended a lot of weight towards my later job when I was designing electronics, and that background, to have that in. So just to pause, that was my way of giving back. The experiences that I had, I could now use those to make something that was that good. That was the standard. So, you know, if it made, I guess the other aspect of it was when we were in Spain, the F-15s were there, and they did very little maintenance. The F-111 was probably the highest man-hour for maintenance out of any plane in service. And just because it was a little bit older, it had a lot of avionics. But the new ones coming out were mostly digital. Ours were some of the more antiquated analog systems. And so with the new digital ones, I also saw that if you make a good product, the maintenance goes down. So with the new digital ones, it was apparent that you know, they were spending less time maintaining their aircraft. And so yeah, so that tied back to where I was later on with the design, and it you know, hopefully paid off dividends later on for someone else down the road that filled my shoes.
What would you have done if you did not enlist in the Air Force?
If I did not enlist in the Air Force, I probably would have pursued my degree. Probably along the same lines. I probably certainly wouldn't have, maybe not have gone so far as getting a master's degree. I think the confidence that came out of that and those experiences you have, it gave me a lot of self-confidence that you could do that. You could do a task and I guess not be afraid of the challenge because you had that experience to learn something new and maintain it. Certainly the avionics was something completely new that I had no exposure to prior to that. But here you are with the state-of-the-art system, and I mean, it gives you a lot of confidence that to go out there and do something new.
Did you learn any life lessons from your experiences?
Life lessons? Grateful, I guess, when you give up your freedom to serve your country, you sign up to a commitment to the United States of America that you're going to serve for a certain term. You sign your name on the line. You don't have a chance to just quit. I'm tired of it, I quit. No, it's a long-term commitment, so you have to make the most of it. And it is what you make out of it. But then again, that sacrifice, you know, in my opinion, makes you appreciate the freedom that you do have. when you're out of the service, when you're separated. Because you know, when you were in the service, you had to take orders, make your bed, and there was a fixed routine. But when you're out, you have more freedom to maybe not make the bed or do other things that, there's no strict routine, no inspections, you don't have to salute anybody. But it makes you proud of others who have served, and just being a part of that chapter of history. Certainly when I served, it was kind of towards the end of the Cold War. So now when you reflect back, all the events that were going on. For instance, when we were traveling around Europe, we couldn't go to Berlin. You needed a pass to go to Berlin, so it wasn't just you go anywhere you want. At that time, there was restrictions on travel. So because I was in England, I couldn't just go visit Berlin without having a pass. Other things, again, you don't have to take orders. I think you're more self-confident. Don't have to sweat the small stuff. Maybe another thing would be less fear of hazardous situations. You can keep calm, work through the situation. I remember one time that we had changed the engine on the aircraft, and I was assigned as fire watch, basically the man fire extinguisher in front of the aircraft. And when they ran it up, there was fuel spilling everywhere. So what do you do in that situation? In your mind, you're thinking run, 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 but you can't run because you are manning the fire extinguisher. So if there was anything that would happen, it's your job to respond and put it out. In addition, there were 2 people in the cockpit that were responding on you, that were relying on you to respond accordingly. So you have to look at that situation and act accordingly. I mean, that's your job. So in those situations, you kind of think about what's the right thing to do. You don't just maybe shy away from it. You kind of step up to that responsibility.
If you served abroad, what are some memories you have of that experience?
Serving abroad was, I signed up to serve abroad. I wanted to go to probably Germany, and it ended up in England because that's where the base, where the airplanes that I became trained on were located. So my memories of that were, again, traveling around. Because I was in England and stationed there permanently, I could go to London on a weekend. I could go to Scotland. My mom and dad were the first ones to come over. And they had actually taken me from Fort Lowry in Colorado down to Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. So that was my second change of station. And then when I was in England, they came over to visit me. And I was really, I remember being very happy to see them because those are familiar faces. That's family. I mean, we talk over the phone and get cards and so forth, but we didn't have the video conferencing. So to actually see them in person, people you've known, all your life, was really exciting. After that, that was 1988, and then the next year my sister came over for 2 weeks, and again we traveled all over, and we had a lot of fun. So that was really memorable, having the family over.
What was your favorite memory?
Favorite memory, again, traveling around. Seeing new things. Again, it was an opportunity. And that comes back to my dad, where he was stationed in occupied Japan. And he said, you can be miserable or make the most of it. And he had always told stories about climbing Mount Fuji or riding in airplanes. He said, your uniform was your pass, so you could ride in airplanes. you had to stay on for the whole flight, but you could ride those free. So his story is traveling around Japan and Tokyo during his service in occupied Japan. I think was always probably an inspiration to going around and traveling. So make the most of it. Wherever you are, go out and see things and enjoy yourself.
Thank you for your time and sharing with me your experiences. You've done our country great service.